Thank you both for being here again. You are right in the vortex of probably the most critical crisis in American history, in my opinion, and that's this $20 trillion debt. Our federal government's grown from $2.4 trillion in 2000 last year under President Clinton to $3.9 trillion last year. As a percentage, it's 21.6% of our GDP outlays. We're only collecting about 18.5% in revenue, which although is an all-time high relative in aggregate dollars. My question, I have two things. I want to go to the HR personnel issues, but first, General, your report for years has been outlining excess spending, wasting spending, and all that. Government has proven that it's not very efficient. If you look at the VA, the Postal Service, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, the lack of an audit in DOD, the poverty rate today is about the same as it was in the mid-'60s. So some of these big sweeping programs just haven't worked, and part of it is the inefficiency inside the control that we're spending. You've identified somewhere between $200 and $400 billion over time relative to excess spending out of that $4 trillion. Is that a fair directionally? Is that a fair statement directionally?
Yeah. I would say.
Can you give us some granularity on that? And
sure,
here's my specific question.
Sure.
How much of that is mandatory, which is the $3 trillion we spend, and how much is discretionary, the $1 trillion? Can you break it out that way?
Yeah, sure. First, in the reports you're referring to on overlap, duplication, fragmentation, cost savings, we've made in the first 6 years 645 recommendations. 51% of those have been implemented, and so far that money that has saved or will save $136 billion. So Congress has acted on a number of our recommendations. I'm very pleased. There are, including new ones we added this year, about 400 open recommendations yet, 61 specific recommendations to the Congress. I think there's tens of billions of dollars in additional money that's been spent. Some of that's in the entitlement programs in Medicare, Medicaid, and some is in discretionary spending. I'd have to go back and sort that through.
What's the current outstanding potential reduction?
Senator, I can't give you a fixed number. It depends on what Congress does in implementing the recommendations. All I could say is there's a lot of tens of billions of dollars for sure. So far, it's been $136 billion. That gives you some order of magnitude, I think, of what you might want to look at in the future, but I can't put a number on it. But I also, endorse what Keith has said, though the real crux of dealing with our debt and deficit issue is really dealing with the mandatory
Which is
spending.
very interesting. Inside our budget process, which this committee sits over, that's not within our purview. Our purview is the $1.1 trillion discretionary. And that's the reason for the question is that the potential's in the tens, maybe hundreds of billions of dollars of not waste, but all the errors that we have in how we run the government. And the question is how much is in the purview of the Budget Committee and how much is outside? I'd love to come sit with you, and we will do that. I'll get on your calendar to follow up on this. Dr. Hall, it's an interesting study. The ranking member made a comment that the overpayment seemed to be, his implication was that it was mostly on high school and below. But let me ask you a question. Half the people that work for the federal government are in GS 11, 12, and 13. Is that pretty much correct?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, that's exactly correct. It's your number. And
it is.
So the question is, GS 11, 12, and 13, are they at minimum wage?
No.
No, they're not, are they? These are bachelors, masters, generally people with some training. Is that correct?
That's right.
So their difference between the public sector and the private sector is about 21% in your study, if I remember correctly, with a bachelor's degree, just a bachelor's degree. And most of that difference was in non-salary. It was in benefits,
right.
Mostly the defined benefit plan. Most of corporate America is converted to a defined contribution plan,
right.
And the government's still in a defined benefit environment. That's one of the big differences between the two. My question is what can be done relative to that potential? Some $37 billion estimated, but I don't look at it that way. That's hard to get at. You have to have turnover, and when you replace people, they're coming into the same system. So my question is this. Are we able to compete for quality talent, A? B, do we have the wherewithal to continue to have the best and brightest? And what I mean is, in corporate America, if you don't perform, you don't stick around long. Do we have the ability in the federal government to continue to weed out non-performers and adapt to this level of pay?
I think those are exactly the right questions. You know, this study gives you some idea of where we are in
Yes, sir.
comparison.
And it's very good, by the way, I have to say.
But it's right, the bigger issue is are we able to recruit effectively and retain people who are high quality and that sort of thing. And I think this is a piece of that information.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Totally different.
Right.
Not only those two things, but the third is, are we able to have, does the system always have the best and brightest move to the top? And are we able to remove people who are not productive?
Right. That is probably an issue. We haven't, I don't want to speak too much because we haven't looked specifically about what if we change some things, what would be the likely effect. But that's an important part of having an efficient government, right, is that people who are top performers get rewarded for that, and they stick around. That's the issue of retention, I think.
Are we able to incent outside of salary and benefits for people under specific, in specific situations, for specific outcomes?
Yeah,
I'm thinking about an audit in the DOD, for one, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to generalize, you know, and this was just sort of one look. But I certainly think there are instances like that where it's difficult. I think particularly if you start looking at some occupations where it's already hard to hire people, it can be hard to keep people. And part of what I'm saying is my personal experience. You know, I've had a lot of years in the federal government, and it is sometimes hard to keep really good people. That's probably true everywhere.
It is.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both. I'm over my time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you both for what you do.